and then we'll move into forum questions, followed by questions from the audience. Mr. Schiff, you go first.
Am I on now? All right, well, thanks, everybody, for coming. I guess we got the undercard tonight, but hopefully one day we'll break out the top of the tickets. But I'll just tell you a little bit about my background, and then I'll save the policies for the Q&As. But so I was born in Connecticut. My father was born in Connecticut, and my grandfather emigrated to Connecticut just over 100 years ago. So third generation here. I live in Weston, and I have a business that is based in Westport. I own a brokerage firm called Euro Pacific Capital. And I started the company maybe about 15 years ago. And as late as 2000, I was still a one-man company. And now, in the last decade, I've grown. I now have over 100 employees. I have 5 other offices, so 6 total. I have 15,000 more individual accounts, people like you. I do a lot of retail business. I also have a couple of mutual funds. I do asset management with a registered investment advisor, and I do investment banking. I've also authored a number of books. 4, the most recent, came out last week, How an Economy Grows and Why It Crashes. And my first book came out in February of 2007 called Crash Proof, How to Profit from the Coming Economic Collapse. And, one of the things that's been the overwhelming or driving force behind the way I run my investment firm is my advice is generally focused on macroeconomics and how government policies interfere with or inhibit economic growth, how they undermine the value of currencies and productivity. And as a result of that, I've been very reluctant to invest here. I've been very nervous about the policies emanating from Washington, from Congress, from the Federal Reserve that have undermined the value of our money, that have debased our currency, that have rendered our businesses less productive and less competitive. And as an investor and money manager, I've been trying to find ways to protect myself from Washington. But the problem is now the mistakes they're making are now so grave, and the consequences are so disastrous, not just for investors, but for all Americans, that as an American, I think it's important for me to take a break from what I'm doing and try to do something more important, which is to go to Washington and actually prevent Congress from making those mistakes in the first place, and trying to help recreate the environment that made us a wealthy, successful nation in the first place, because that environment no longer exists today. And it's clear to me that the people who are in Washington are clueless regarding their own culpability in the financial crisis and in the mess our economy is in. And I don't think politicians are going to solve these problems. I think the only problem they see is their own reelection. And the things that need to be done cannot be done if you're trying to get reelected, because a lot of what needs to be done isn't popular. It's certainly not going to be popular with the special interests, and it's not going to be popular with a lot of voters who are looking to get checks from the government. And we have to be willing to understand that the root cause of our problems and the source of our problems, and to do something about it, not just talk about it and kick the can down the road and try to postpone the consequences until after the next election. So that's who I am and why I'm running, and I'll talk more as we get to the questions.
Thank you, Mr. Schiff. We'll proceed with forum questions, which will be limited, the answers to which will be limited to 3 minutes. We'll start with Mr. Schiff. It is said that the need for bipartisan compromise and the influence of lobbyist culture corrupts even the most honest soul once they step foot in D.C. How will you maintain your resolve to discern the difference between political necessity and unacceptable legislation?
Well, a lot of people think that the goal is compromise, that we need bipartisanship, that we need to cooperate. And, I don't think so. I think that's why we're in this mess. I think people have compromised their principles for too long for political expediency. And I want to put an end to that. And so, gridlock is fine with me if that's the only thing that stands between us and more government. But at this point, we need more than just that. I mean, we need to really turn back the clock, roll back the tide. We've got to repeal a lot of the rules and the regulations that have been written over the years that have encumbered our markets and our economy and have created the problems that led to the financial crisis of 2008. We need to dramatically reduce the size of government. We need to shrink government. We need to abolish departments and agencies and slash spending across the board. And if we can cut spending enough, then we can finally lower taxes. And none of this is going to happen if we simply compromise. I mean, we've got, runaway deficits right now. We've got a budget deficit of $1.5 trillion. Social Security is running in the red. The Congress is going to want to try to attack this. They just appointed a bipartisan committee. I know the committee is going to come out and the recommendations are going to be we need some spending cuts and some tax increases. We don't need that. We can't do that compromise. We can't raise taxes and give the government more money to spend because they'll spend it and then some. We have to draw the line on tax increases and force the spending cuts. And it means standing up for what's right and trying to win the ideological battle, getting the other side to accept our principles, and if not, fighting for them and trying to make sure that they don't get reelected until we have the critical mass that we need to get this done.
Petroleum needs in this country depend largely on foreign oil. Yet many of these countries fuel anti-American terrorists with our money. Despite our own rich natural resources, the federal government has claimed ownership of much state land and denied access to developing these natural resources. What is your approach to addressing these related issues? We'll start with Peter.
And the way the government solves the problem is they create more government. We had the oil shock in the 1970s, and of course, the reason that oil prices went up in the 1970s was because we debased the value of our money. We went off the gold standard in 1971. The dollar collapsed. It dropped by 70%. The Swiss franc went from 23 cents to 75 cents. It went from getting 300 and something yen to the dollar to 150. And so gold went from $35 an ounce to $800, and oil went from $3 a barrel to $3 a barrel. Well, what was the government's solution? The government's solution was to create the Department of Energy. Fantastic, right? The Department of Energy was implemented to reduce our dependence on foreign oil. Well, when they started the Department of Energy, we imported less than 40% of our oil. Now we import more than 70% of our oil. Right? What does that accomplish? Absolutely nothing. It's created a lot of jobs for a lot of bureaucrats, and they waste $730 billion of our tax dollars every year. First thing we can do is abolish the Department of Energy. And the main reason that we don't develop our natural resources in this country, whether it's oil and gas or the minerals or even labor, we have a lot of unemployed people in this country. Why aren't they working? It's because government rules and regulations prevent them from working. It is cheaper for us to import oil than to develop our own reserves because the government makes it so expensive with all the rules, all the regulations, and all the taxes. That needs to end. We need to free up our capital and deregulate the economy so that we can develop our resources domestically instead of borrowing money from the Chinese to import oil from the Saudis. It makes no sense. We're going into debt and bringing our country deeper into bankruptcy, yet we're leaving resources, unexploited. And we have to open up more land to exploration. I mean, look at what's going on up in Alaska. You have, people in Alaska want to drill up there, and the federal government says you can't. I mean, why? I mean, the people that live there, they don't mind. But how many Americans actually go up there? And they're talking about the fact that there might be some caribou or some species that might be inconvenienced. And the truth is, from what I can tell, they like the pipelines going through there. I mean, it's warm. It's like the best place if you're a cowboy. Where you go, you want to go by that pipeline. That's where you go to have your babies. And so, the thing is, it's ridiculous. To let sometimes some of the inconsequential concerns of a few radical environmentalists, prevent the country from developing its natural resources.
Thank you. Federal policy or legislation to develop domestic energy sources have been hampered by the concerns of the environmentalists. How would you address this issue, critical to the growth of our economy and future prosperity? You can just answer.
Yeah. Well, I mean, part of it is you have to separate. In many cases, the environmentalists are just socialists in disguise, and they're using the environment as a way to advance their socialist agenda. You have to see there are some legitimate environmental concerns, but you have to separate that from the radical environmentalists that is simply, where they want to, they want to stop the development of some, because there's a little snail darter or some kind of, what was the word I'm looking for? But insignificant, little fish that can't go extinct. I mean, there are more animals that are extinct than that are still alive. I mean, extinction is a natural process of evolution, right? Species go extinct. And it doesn't mean that we have to figure out every single species that exists and make sure that it never goes extinct. I mean, we don't, there doesn't have to be, let's say there's, 1,000 species of worms. I mean, if one of them goes away, does it really, we can't look at every little worm and say, aha, we can't build a factory here, we can't have a mine here, because that one little species of worm isn't going to exist anymore. Well, how do we know? Maybe it's not supposed to exist. So you have to separate that. There's a lot of it's socialist, and they try to get their agenda through that environmentalist smokescreen. So we have to get by that and be rational about protecting the big picture and the environment, but not letting the concerns of these radical environmentalists get in the way. But even more so than that, it's just all the other rules and regulations that make business and developing resources in this country so expensive. The government raises the bar, that it's just too costly, you can't do it economical. It's still cheaper to import it than develop our own resources because of what the government does. And you can look at, there are plenty of poor countries all around the world that are sitting on resources. Why can't they develop them? Because there is no free market. There's too much government, so it doesn't happen. It's a century from now.
Next question, we'll start with Mr. Forrest. Federal accounting mechanisms appear to be malleable according to the needs of the moment. Currently, the Obama administration seeks to obscure the true cost of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac mortgage houses by categorizing them as private entities, thereby keeping the price of their bailouts off the books. How would you address this fluctuating accounting rules which keep the cost of government hidden?
First, just to add on to what you said about Fannie Mae, I saw the head of Fannie Mae, and I forget what the guy's name was, on television a couple years ago, and he was announcing a brand new policy for Fannie Mae. It was brand new policy. The policy was they were only going to insure mortgages where the borrowers could afford to pay the money back. And the anchor was like, well, what do you mean? I mean, that's not, you didn't have that policy before? And it's like, talk about closing the barn door after the horse had left. But this is what they said. I'm not making this stuff up. They had adjustable rate mortgages. And they said it was Freddie's policy. They had their guidelines that said, okay, we're only going to insure a mortgage if it's no more than 35% or whatever it was of your income. And that was the cap. But if you took out an ARM, they only looked at the teaser rate. Right? They didn't look at the level that it could adjust to when the teaser expired. So even if the adjustment rate proved to be more than 100% of what you earned, they would still approve it. And what they said is, well, going forward, we're actually going to make sure that you can afford the higher rate that it sets to, not just the introductory rate. And Anchor's like, well, why didn't you do that? Why did you do that all along? I mean, this seems basic, right? And they said, well, people were making a lot of money in the real estate market, and so we didn't want to tell people that they couldn't buy a house. We wanted to give them the opportunity to profit. So in other words, Fannie and Freddie were subsidizing speculating. They saw speculating, and they didn't want to do anything to stop it. I mean, that was with government guarantees. Look, the problem with government accounting, when you see these politicians criticizing Wall Street or any private sector company for fraud or accounting, the biggest fraud in accounting is the federal government. Their budget is a complete and total lie. The national debt, which they report, which is about $12.5 trillion, that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? The debt on Freddie and Fannie that the question talks about, that debt is off the books. But the federal government has already stated that it stands behind all that debt, $6 trillion. They've already coughed up like several hundred billion, in the Fannie, but they've backed them up. Well, why isn't that $6 trillion part of the national debt? Why isn't it subject to the debt ceiling? It should be. The government owes the money now. It assumed the debt. And there's all sorts of off-budget, off-balance sheet items that are not included. Well, how could you do that? If you owe money, how can you just say, well, I don't really owe it because they shifted it off my balance sheet? Yeah, but you still owe it. If anybody in the private sector did that, they'd be in jail. And, that's what Enron was doing, right? And it's even bigger. most companies, if you get a balance sheet and you look at their liabilities, they also report their contingency liabilities. Now, what's the difference? A real liability is if I borrow money, I have to pay it back. That's a liability. But what if I guaranteed somebody else's debt? Well, that's a contingency liability because I might owe it. And what you're required to do is assess a value based on a statistical probability. How much exposure do you have on that contingency liability? Right? Well, the federal government doesn't report one nickel in contingency liabilities, despite the fact that it has $10 trillion in Social Security, $30 trillion in Medicare. I'm not sure what it is in student loans that they've guaranteed or other guarantees. And of course, every time they have something for emergencies, off the budget, if they have to spend money on, if you're as a household and, you have an emergency, you can't put the expense off budget, it's on your budget. They just say, well, we're not going to count it because it was emergency. Well, you still spent it. So the whole thing is fraud. There's, the truth in accounting, those laws should apply to the government first. The government should be forced to give an accurate statement of its assets and liabilities so we can really appreciate the true nature of our insolvency and maybe force the leaders to do something about reining in the debt and spending.
Thank you. This is a good segue to the next question. A recent Wall Street Journal op-ed claimed that it is pointless to audit the Fed as it publicly publishes its financial statements on a weekly basis. However, dating back to the 1970s with the passage of the CRA, Fed chairs have been increasingly aligning financial policy to the federal administration's policies. What information would be gained from such an audit, and what impact would this information have on potential policy?
Well, I'm sure we'd learn a lot of very disturbing stuff, which is exactly why the government doesn't want it to happen. It's very ironic that one of the reasons that they claim that we can't audit the Fed is that we don't want to compromise its independence. Its independence was compromised a long time ago. There's nothing left to compromise. The whole thing is politicized. When they slashed interest rates down to 1% following the bursting of the dot-com bubble, that wasn't good economic policy. That was done for politics. That was done to help re-elect George Bush. When they slashed interest rates down to 0%, this time, it was to stimulate the economy. It's to help incumbent politicians get re-elected. The whole thing is politicized. At this point, it is so politicized that we need to audit them to find out what these guys are doing, because they're not doing anything good. And the interesting thing is, in this new financial regulation bill that they just wrote in the Senate, it is actually going to completely take the legs out from under the Audit the Fed bill that passed the House. It still hasn't been voted on in the Senate, but what they slipped into this bill basically makes it impossible to even do that. So it basically negates what the House did. They slipped it in to the financial regulation bill. So the powers that be in Washington do not want the Fed audited. They do not want the public knowing what these guys are doing, because what they're really doing is artificially propping up a phony economy, but creating a ticking time bomb that's going to explode sometime in the near future, and our politicians don't want that exposed. They want the Federal Reserve financing their deficits, and they don't care how they do it. They just want them to do it.
Thank you. Mr. Forrest?
That's why I'm going to have Peter as my financial advisor in Washington when we take this Senate seat.
Youth and unskilled unemployment in the USA is at an all-time high of 20%, and in Europe it is a permanent issue leading to adult children being supported by parents. What are the factors leading to this situation, and what would you see as a solution? Mr. Forrest?
Well, there are a lot of reasons why we have unemployment in this country, and most of them are related to the government, particularly among young people. Probably the chief offender is the minimum wage law. We should abolish it. The minimum wage law makes it illegal for low-skilled people to get jobs. It destroys jobs. You raise the bottom ladder up on the employment ladder. A lot of young people, don't have much in the way of skills. They haven't developed them yet. They don't have a lot of productivity. They can't demand a high wage. When you compound the minimum wage with other costs that are on top, workman's comp or payroll taxes, the minimum wage is significantly higher. Several states add something on to the federal minimum wage, creating even more unemployment problems. Recently the United States government decided to impose our minimum wage on the island of Samoa, and we destroyed their entire economy. We put half the country out of work. They had their main industries was tuna canning, and the plants shut down because they couldn't afford the minimum wage. And, we destroyed the whole country is a disaster now, thanks to us. It was like we committed an act of war. We destroyed them with one bill. But also, other things that they can do on state levels, occupational licensing laws. I mean, most occupations are licensed. There's no reason for that. It makes it much more difficult. It erects the barriers to entry. They should eliminate occupational licensing for most occupations. I was watching a special on Fox with Geraldo. One of them he was making fun of was floral arranging. If you want to get a job in a as arranging flowers, you need a license as a floral arranger. Why? I mean, the government's got to protect us from getting a bad arrangement. What's the worst case scenario? I mean, you don't like the way the flowers are arranged, you rearrange them yourself, and you don't go back to the florist. But we make it more difficult for people to get jobs. Also, the employment laws. As an employer, one of the most dangerous things about hiring somebody is you might get a lawsuit. Especially if you fire them. So the government has made it so easy for employees to sue their employers that employers don't want to hire them. So there are all kinds of things that we've done, and all of these rules and regulations disproportionately affect the lowest skilled person. So if you want to know, here in Connecticut, why are we pumping our own gas with all these unemployed kids? Well, because if we had to pay a minimum wage, they wouldn't pump it. Why can't they just pump for tips? It's illegal. That's what people used to do. But you know how a lot of kids became auto mechanics? They had jobs pumping gas. And between fill-ups, they were learning a skill from a trip mechanic. We got rid of that. How many times, you go to, the movie theater is dark. You want to go to your seat, and there's no usher to show you around. The minimum wage destroyed the ushers. I remember when I was a kid, not only was there a different person in the supermarket that rang up the checkout, another person bagged it, and someone else took it to your car. They don't do that anymore. Where are all these jobs? All this self-service. How many times you're on? You call up, you don't get a person. You get an answering machine. You get a million buttons you got to push. Why can't there be a person answering the phone? Because the government made it too expensive to hire that person. So we have all these government rules and regulations that are destroying occupations. Some restaurants use paper plates because they don't want to hire dishwashers. I mean, there's a lot of ways that governments have just completely eliminated occupation. So we need to look at those rules and regulations. Liberals pass them, and they feel good about themselves. It's terrible that somebody should have to work for $3 an hour, so let's make it illegal to pay somebody less than $6 an hour, and then they feel good about themselves. Meanwhile, they destroy the jobs for all the people whose marginal productivity doesn't equal $6 an hour. They never look at the unseen consequences of their regulations.
Thank you. Last month, Senators Graham and Schumer put forth a proposal for illegal immigrants to be placed on a path to citizenship, which President Obama declared promising. What mechanisms would you support to address the intertwined issues of illegal aliens and their impact on the USA economy, security, and security of our vote?
For me?
Yeah.
Well, I don't like the policy of trying to say, well, if you're here illegally, we're going to set up a way for you to become legal, because we send a message to everybody else. Well, that's how you do it, right? You bypass the laws, you just sneak in here, and then you wait for amnesty. So I don't think that's the way to do it. I think what we need to do is we need to strengthen our borders. I mean, we've got so many troops in Western Europe, in Japan. There's no sense in them being there. Why don't we bring them home and defend our own borders for a change, instead of other nations that don't even need defending? And make sure that the people aren't sneaking in. We want them coming in the right way, but I want to make it easier for legal immigrants to come in. And what we want is a sensible immigration policy that if you're going to come in and you're going to work, come on in. Right? You can come in on a work visa. You have to get a job. If you can't find a job or start a business, then you leave. I mean, you can't come in and go on welfare or go on food stamps. If that's why you're coming, we don't want you here. But if you're going to come and work and be a productive member of society, then we benefit from that. We benefit from that labor. And so we want them coming. We don't want people coming in illegally and then not working, living, committing crimes or living off the social welfare state. That simply drives up the cost of these programs and bankrupts us even quicker.
Thank you. Due to the delayed response to General McChrystal's request for increased military support in Afghanistan, The Taliban will likely be able to further fund terrorist and insurgency efforts by funneling the poppy harvest into the narcotics trade. Yet farmers have little else to fund their economy. In your opinion, does the United States have an obligation to help diversify the Afghani economy, thereby increasing our own national security?
Well, I guess the short answer to your question is no. I don't think that the U.S. government should be making economic policy in Afghanistan. They've done enough damage making economic policy here. The Afghan economy, I don't think, is any of our business. Terrorists are, but I don't think that we should be getting involved in that. I think we have too much of a presence in Afghanistan as it is right now. But I think we should protect America from terrorists. But that's it. I don't want to get involved in their economy, their government. That's just a no-win situation for us, and it's going to probably create more problems than we think we're going to solve.
Thank you. Next question. Government distribution of grants by politics results in the creation of legislative earmarks enforced by lobbyists and paid for by campaign contributions. This culture of corruptive legislation and budgetary expenditures has had dire implications for our national debt. What actions do you support to remediate this practice? We'll start with Mr. Schiff.
Well, even if they don't earmark it, they're still going to spend it. That's the problem is the spending. A lot of these congressmen put in the earmarks because the idea is, well, if I don't earmark it for something, it's still going to get spent. It's just going to get spent on something else. So we've got to stop the spending, period. And I've said what I want to do to stop the spending, to stop the perpetual increase in the debt ceiling. We actually have a debt ceiling in this country. Let's make it a real ceiling, not an ever-increasing ceiling. The problem is now, every time they get to the debt ceiling, they vote to raise it. Usually, late at night, and they put a pay raise in there for themselves when they vote for it. But nobody wants to be held accountable. That's why they try to space the increase in the debt ceiling far away from any election, so that people don't remember it. And at the same time, you've got politicians, when they go home and campaign, they say, I'm for a balanced budget amendment, and then they go back to Washington and vote to increase the debt ceiling. If we can simply stop that, and I've said as a senator, I want to lead the filibuster to make sure the debt ceiling is not increased, and I just need 40 other senators to stand with me, and then we stop deficit spending. We stop all the earmarks, we stop it all. Because if they can't borrow, they can't spend more than their tax revenues. And so if their tax revenues are $2.5 trillion, they can't spend $4 trillion like they are right now. They have to cut the budget. Right now the government is spending $1.60 for every dollar we collect in taxes. If we don't let them raise the debt ceiling, they have to take that 60 cents and cut it. And then we'll get rid of the earmarks, and we'll get rid of a lot of other stuff we don't need. We can change what's going on in Washington. Instead of what new regulations can we pass, it'll be what regulations can we eliminate. Instead of, what new programs can we add, is what programs can we get rid of. Because that's what happens. And then we start shrinking government instead of growing government, and then we can start moving in the right direction and growing the economy. Nancy Pelosi said we have to pass the bill to see what's in it.
A recent Pew study shows that trust in the federal government is at a historic low of 22%, which increased, interestingly, to 25% after passage of Obamacare. The study concluded that Americans desire smaller government. How do you propose to balance a smaller federal budget with the reality of needing to support diverse government functions and services?
I don't know who the 25% are that trust the government. What's wrong with these guys? They've got to wake up. This country was founded by people who didn't trust government. That's why we wrote a constitution, to keep these guys in line. Unfortunately, the judges no longer enforce it. But, what was your question?
My question was,
how are we going to balance it?
how would you propose to balance a smaller federal budget with reality of supporting government functioning and services? Well,
we have to understand that most of the government...
What would you cut?
Yeah, well, I want to cut a lot of stuff, but what we have to understand is most of the services we get from government, we shouldn't get from the federal government. We should get them from the state government, if we get them at all. So I want to abolish all the functions that are not authorized by the Constitution. I don't want the federal government getting involved in things that it has no business being involved in. And there are most of what the government does. So I want to go and slash government spending across the board. I mean, the most important thing for the federal government is national defense. That's why it's there. That's why it has the power to tax. Each state doesn't have an army and a navy, so that's what the federal government has to do. And most of the federal government should be national defense. The rest of it should be, done at a state and a local level. There are other things that the federal government can do, but the federal government's powers are supposed to be few and defined. That if that wasn't the case, the founding fathers never would have ratified the Constitution. They were initially nervous that the federal government would have too much power, and our founding fathers assured the colonists that was not the case. The federal government would be very limited, that you would barely know they were there. They would hardly tax you. They would be involved in diplomacy and matters of foreign affairs or war. And so we need to get the government out of these unconstitutional functions, and we're just going to just cutting across the board. I mean, there are a lot of agencies that we can abolish completely. There are some other agencies that we can consolidate their functions, and of course we have to go after the entitlements. I mean, the government is spending much too money on entitlements, and I don't think anybody is entitled to somebody else's money. We have to make that clear, and we've got to make the cuts.
Thank you. Rogue nations such as North Korea and Iran are intent on proliferating nuclear armament, thus increasing their global presence. Yet President Obama recently signed an arms reduction treaty. How do you anticipate this to resonate on global balance of power, and what diplomatic policies could make a positive impact on this issue?
I don't have a problem with a reduction in nuclear arms. We probably have more nuclear arms than we need, and other nations probably do as well. But the key is not to undermine the deterrent effect of the nuclear arms that we do have. I mean, that is the problem, to try to make some kind of categorical statements to the effect that the nuclear weapons will not be used. I mean, of course, you hope you don't use them, but you don't tell people that you're not going to use them. And what's the point of having them? The point of having them is that people know that they're there and they're afraid of doing something because you might use them. So you don't want to take that option off the table. As horrific as it might sound, it has to be on the table, and that's why the deterrent works. But I also think we do have to try to make sure that the nations, certainly Iran, are nations that don't have a nuclear weapon now, but who might develop one, and it might fall into the hands of terrorists, which is pretty obvious. That there are certain times when we can take action and use the technology that we have and the sophisticated weaponry and the satellites that we have to make sure that does not happen. But that can be done in a very strategic and a very low-cost way. It does not involve the mistakes that we made in Iraq. We don't have to invade a nation, an occupied nation, try to establish a government there to make sure that they don't develop nuclear weapons. We can do that very simply and very cost effectively, and that's the type of defense I would favor.
Thank you. And this is my last question, and then we'll proceed to the audience questions. What does your senatorial win mean for Connecticut? What priority issues will you seek to address? Mr. Schiff?
Well, Connecticut has a lot of problems, many of which are coming from Hartford, and hopefully, as a senator from the state, people will pay attention to what I have to say, and maybe I can be an effective voice to help the senator, whoever becomes governor of Connecticut or the state legislature, to do what needs to be done on the local level, to have somebody with a bully pulpit who people listen to, talking about what really needs to be done to slash our state workforce, to get rid of a lot of these unfunded or make cuts to the unfunded pensions, and to reduce taxes in the state. So instead of repelling businesses, we can attract businesses and create jobs for all of the government jobs that we eliminated, real jobs, productive jobs, and bring more businesses into the state. On a national level, though, what I want to do to benefit Connecticut, and Connecticut is one of the states in the country, it's certainly in the top 2 or 3, where we get back a smaller percentage of money from the federal government relative to what the federal government takes. So all the people in Connecticut, we pay Social Security taxes, we pay income taxes, and then we get money back. Some of our citizens get Social Security checks, or they get wealth, whatever they get from the government. But net, for every dollar we send to Washington, 60 cents trickles back. That's a lousy deal for the state of Connecticut. There are actually some states that actually get back more than they send to Washington. They benefit from this transfer of wealth. So what I want to do is reduce government spending so that I can reduce taxes, and I want to return a lot of the federal functions back to the states. And every time I do that, Connecticut has a huge windfall, because if I can cut the dollar in taxes, then Connecticut gets that 40 cents, and either the state government can spend it here in Connecticut, or it doesn't have to spend it at all, and the citizens can have a pay raise.
To invite the audience to offer questions. What we'll do is each candidate will choose someone, and both candidates will answer the question.
There's only one hand up, so.
I really appreciate it. Again, for me, it's going to be a tough choice, but I have to ask this because you mentioned, both of you have mentioned about safety, but I haven't heard one word from either one of you about liberty, to be free. I have always been a fan of Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan, to me, still has a great legacy. Ronald Reagan said, or believed totally, that there were two great threats when he was president. One was the Soviet Union, and the other was a soft, secret police in the United States. This is actually out of his mouth. Namely, a vast, unaccountable government bureaucracy, accountable to no one, that can dictate policy that Americans have to abide by. My God, Wilbur and Orville Wright, would they have a tough time today with the regulations inventing an airplane? Hewlett-Packard founded their company in a garage. Would they have a tough time founding that fantastic company today in a garage? What I'm saying is, the Soviet Union has gone to a great extent, notwithstanding Putin. That's another story to cover. But this other thing about what Europe has done, and now even people in Europe are turning away from this. This idea of this huge, vast bureaucracy, whether it's through the federal government or any government, dictating policy to us that's unaccountable to no one, Ronald Reagan was very, very concerned about. And I just wanted to get a comment from each of you what you think about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, every time Congress passes a bill and there's regulation written pursuant to it, we lose our liberty, we lose our freedoms. That's what these rules do. They inhibit our ability to make choices and to do the things that we want to do. And every time they pass another law, we lose more freedom and become less free. And that's why what I want to do in Congress is repeal all these rules and these regulations that are restricting our liberties and making our economy less productive. I mean, I feel that every day in my life, in my business, where there are things that I can't do because some government regulation says I can't do it. Recently, I had a registered investment advisory business. And I'm trying to think of, I just started this investment advisory business, and I also had a brokerage business. And I'm giving clients the ability to move their accounts from the commission-based brokerage account to a fee-based management account. And there are some Europe Pacific Capital clients that were down. Some of them came in, at the height of the market. They invested some money with me, and their accounts were down. And I was like, gee, well, I'll put you into the money market, my management program. I'm not going to charge you anything because you're down. I'm just going to manage your account until it's not down anymore. I thought it was great. No, they didn't ask for it. I just volunteered it. Well, now I find out from my compliance officer that the lawyers say we can't do that. The government rules won't let it. I can't not charge them. And so I didn't even want to. But now some government rule says, and the government dictates how I do my business. I mean, what difference is it going to make? And there's so many. I mean, I talk to the branch managers, and they're 3 or 4 hours a day. I mean, people are up to their eyeballs with government rules and regulations. They get more cumbersome and more complicated every year, and they never repeal anything. All they do is layer new regulations on the old regulations, and they don't care what it costs the business to comply with it. They don't care if it actually does anything productive. None of it does. It just runs up the cost of doing business, ties my hands as a businessman. I mean, what protects my customers is my own integrity and my own desire to maintain my brand. To grow my business by doing right by my customers. I'm not unique. Most businessmen are like that. I mean, there's not that many crooks. I mean, there are always dishonest people in every profession. The problem is some crooked guy swindles some old lady, they put it on the news, and now we need more financial regulation. Meanwhile, that regulation does far more damage than the few crooks that slip through the cracks. And the good thing about the free enterprise system is, in general, crooks don't get very far. They don't get a lot of clients because they go bankrupt because they screw their clients. So they don't get to rip off a lot of people. The people that grow and have a lot of clients are doing it right. And you do have an exception like this Bernie Madoff. But you know what? Bernie Madoff never could have pulled off that scam if it wasn't for the SEC, if it wasn't for FINRA, if people weren't confident that the government was auditing. Because if there were no government regulators, there would have been more vigilance on the part of his clients. There would have been more independent review, and it would have been ferreted out. Instead, it was the government that was doing it, and of course, he got in, good as his daughter or whatever married one of the SEC guys, and we need to bring back our freedoms. I mean, the reason this country became such a powerful country, such a wealthy country, was because we were free. People came to this country from all around the world in search of freedom, not in search of handouts. They wanted to be free of government. I mean, do you think we could have gotten anywhere? We never would have settled the West. Can you imagine these covered wagons trying to go out west with OSHA workers there, with IRS agents there, trying to make, is this wagon up to code? You got this? I mean, we never would have gotten anywhere as a nation with all these rules and regulations. Yeah, you.
Okay, I was really bummed out that Mr. McMahon and Mr. Simmons were not going to be able to be here tonight. I really wanted to get a chance to compare apples to apples. But it makes this question very easy for me. What would each one of you be able to do at this point to take Linda McMahon out?
Without weapons.
She's obviously not. She's not that easy to just take out. She could stay in it until the very end. She certainly has.
How are you going to win this race, guys?
Well, I think the way I beat Linda is, I think Linda and I have, in a way, a similar message in that we're both business people. We both run businesses successfully. We both have never been involved in politics, so we're able to make the argument that we can clean up Washington, that we are coming from business, that we're not corrupted, we're certainly not in it for the money, we don't need the job, and and that's what we need. We can tap into the anti-establishment, throw the bums out environment. But where I think I can shine where Linda doesn't is in two areas. One, though we both have business experience, I think mine is far more relevant to the problems facing the country. It's one thing to understand how to run a business, but you also have to understand economics and what's wrong with the country, and understand economic policy, understand finance, understand Wall Street, understand all the real root causes of the financial crisis and all the ways the government has brought this about. I don't think she knows that. I think she knows that there's a problem, and she's right there, but I don't think she really has the understanding of economics to understand the nature of it and what needs to be done. And I don't think that she has the credibility. I think we need to lead. I want to lead a revolution in the Republican Party in the Senate. And I don't know that she'll be able to do that. I think she might be a decent senator, but I don't know that she's going to lead the Senate. I don't know that she's going to convince other senators that she knows more about economics than Ben Bernanke or Timothy Geithner or the Council of Economic Advisors. That I want to point out and show senators that they've been listening to the wrong guys. They've been following bad advice, and I think I can do that where she can't. And I think the other problem is I don't think she can win in the general election. I don't care how much money she has. I don't think she's going to win. Because I think the Democrats are going to see all that money, and they're not just going to concede this race. They've got a popular attorney general. They don't want to lose this seat. They don't want to lose after losing Ted Kennedy's seat. They're not going to lose the Dobbs seat that easily. So they're going to raise all the money they need. They're going to put this state in play. They're going to go to Hollywood. They're going to go to Wall Street. They're going to bring out the big guns. Obama's going to be in here with his fundraising machine. And they are going to match Linda dollar for dollar, if not more. And they are going to flood the airwaves with attack ads. And she has already spent over $15 million in this race. And she's still 20 points behind Dave Blumenthal after spending $15 million. And her negatives are very high, despite the fact that not a single negative ad has been run against her. So I think she has some vulnerabilities. in the negative camps. Unfortunately, I think she's got problems with wrestling and some other issues that I think are going to distract from the real issues of this debate, of this race. So if we're going to beat Dick Blumenthal and really have a race about an insider, a career politician, whether they're in Hartford or in Washington, versus a business person, an economist, somebody who's going to come in and clean up Washington, I'm the better candidate to put up against Dick Blumenthal. And I think where Dick Blumenthal is very weak is in debate. I think he did a lousy job in the debate he had that was televised. I think he's lousy when he's interviewed. And I think that's my strong point. I think I'm a much better contrast to Dick Blumenthal than Linda McMahon. I think that I can, put him in his place quicker, and I've joked that if I could debate Dick Blumenthal, he won't be able to get elected dog catcher instead.
Other questions? I'll let you guys choose. Mr. Forrest?
No, you're good at it.
I have so many questions, but this one popped up in my head. What about primary? What is your position on primary? We've got a convention coming up in 3 weeks. And we are in a very interesting place in our government. We've got we the people involved now, one of them. And I think that being on the inside now, I'm recognizing the challenge of business as usual versus principles. And both of you seem to be men of principle. And I think as I've listened to you guys before in other venues and listened to the other two who are ready for these seats, I don't know what's going to happen in May. And I think primaries are what we really need in this state, because it's the only way that we're going to have more of these public forums. Every other forum has been within an RTC environment. So we need that window, and I want to know what you think about primary.
Well, there probably is going to be a primary, from what I can tell. You've got, Rob Simmons has said, though, if he doesn't win at the convention, he is not going to primary. And, maybe he'll be true to his word. My guess is, from knowing Rob, that I think he means it. So, but Linda has stated that regardless of the outcome, she will primary. And that's been my statement. In fact, I never believed that I was going to win the convention, so I always assumed I was getting in it to be part of the primary. So there probably will be a primary. But hopefully it will be a positive primary. What I hope for the Republicans and to try to get elected is that we don't spend the months until August attacking one another. I'd like you look at all the attacks that have been going back and forth between Linda and Rob. And I know the person who benefits from that the most is Dick Blumenthal. And, I would hope, and I, would certainly try the best, for my campaign to have a very positive campaign in the primary where the Republicans don't attack one another. They simply state their case for why they're the best candidate and reserve the attack ads for Dick Blumenthal, for what's going on in Washington. And that way we can come out of this primary with a stronger party, and we can take Dick Blumenthal down along the way, so that we don't just fight one another until August and then let him show up with a whole bunch of money and just take on a wounded opponent. If we do it the right way, a primary can strengthen the party and put us in better shape to take on Dick Blumenthal.